What's up, y'all? It's Pat. We're back. We're gonna watch this video about a 40-year-long Dungeons and Dragons game. Um, it's a video series by called Obsessed by Wired. Um, and it sounds like it'll be interesting. I used to play D&D and would be down to play it again, but it is hard to find a good group that is truly invested in it, um, and really wants to do it. But man, let me tell you, it is a lot of fun if you get somebody that really likes it and is passionate about it, and you've got a good group. It's like, it can become extremely obsessive and something that you really want to participate in. Because the world kind of is created by you. And I think that's a really dope concept, which is why when I really got into trying to do it a couple years ago, I had such a fun time, but then I ended up moving and could no longer participate. So maybe it'll happen again. I would totally be down to do a Dungeons and Dragons D&D, type deal. But maybe I can join this guy's game, honestly. Who knows? Although if it's been going for 40 years, he's probably not going to allow people to join his game, I would bet. I mean, why would you? God, that would be a lot to track.
Remember that game of D&D you started when you were 11? What if it never stopped?
My name is Robert Wardoff. I'm a history professor at the University of Western Ontario. I am a dungeon master for a campaign that has been going on for 40 years.
What began in...
Dude, and he's a history teacher. So I bet you his lore and world creating is probably extremely fascinating and fun to do. Just because if you know a lot about history, you've got a lot of things to refer to make things interesting, exciting, backstabs, the betrayals, the whatever, that would be dope, man. I wish I could be part of something like this.
In secret with a few friends has turned into a game that takes up much of Robert's life and most of his house. Robert has around 30,000 hand-painted figurines, countless custom-made pieces of terrain, and dozens of devoted players taking part in his campaign.
Dozens of devoted players? Oh my god. That's insane.
Going for 40 years. It's going to have to be a good game. If you're going to have people who are going to want to play and are going to want to fly in, you're going to have to offer a product that is going to be better than all the other alternatives that are out there. I can certainly say with confidence that this is the best Dungeons & Dragons game in the world.
Maybe. Definitely the longest in recorded history. I would be shocked to find out that somebody else has lasted longer than that on one campaign. But I've also listened to a lot of other, podcasts. A lot of them, like Critical Role and stuff. Matthew Mercer, D&D and Beyond. There was another one. I'm trying to think of its name. I've listened to quite a bit of those, and they are awesome. So I don't know if it would be the best D&D ever, but because Matthew Mercer, I think he does a damn good job of creating very interesting characters with different personalities, and then he plays with voice actors, so it's pretty fun to hear them go about creating their characters, etc. But I'm sure this game is still dope. Just maybe not I think that's a hard claim to make. The best game ever. Or the best dungeon master ever.
So if I'm playing for 10 hours a week at 52 weeks in a year, that means if I'm doing that times 40, that would be 20,800 hours.
Well, he passes the 10,000 hours needed to be an expert in your field. So he is a twice expert Dungeons and Dragons.
How many minutes is that?
So if I figured that out in minutes, that would end up being 1.24 million minutes, I think. As you crest the ridge, there seems to be quite a commotion. You estimate it could be as many as 24 or so goblins. You surprise them as much as they have surprised you. I need a surprise roll.
That's really just the start. Almost every major decision in Robert's life is designed to keep the game going.
When I was buying a house, the most important part for me was getting a gaming space that I could use. My entire basement is my gaming area.
If he doesn't slow down, he's going to need a bigger house.
Well, I mean, geez, with the amount of players you got playing, I wonder how he affords all of this. Like, do they pay to play? Like, is there a monthly fee involved, or like what? Because to do all that work, I understand he's a history teacher, but 30,000 figurines, that's a lot of money spent on something. So, and then he's hand painting them. I mean,
I have a lot of figs. I've got orcs, I've got elves, I've got dwarves, I've got all the basic things that you'd expect, but I also have very distinct and unique figs. I have vampires, I have undead, I have zombies, I have werewolves, beholders, Tiamat, the mother of all dragons, all the big...
All right, this is somebody that, like, you meet them and you're like, they truly are obsessed. I mean, I guess it makes sense for the series name, but like, holy crap. That is a time investment. I wonder how much time, if you add in like the world building and the, painting of these figurines and all this stuff, I wonder how much time he has spent like preparing, because he says 20,000 hours of actually in-game playing D&D. But there's so much more, especially as a dungeon master. There are so much more work that you have to put in. The players can be lazy because really all you have to do is make sure you show up and you have your character sheets, etc., and you keep track of what's going on in the story as far as your character goes. The dungeon master has to remember it all and where you're at and know where the story's going and lead you, but not lead you, and allow you to make decisions that change or alter the way the story was going to end out, etc. So, props to him. That's insane. His whole life is D&D, basically.
Demonic lords from the Demogorgon.
The Demogorgon! We're deep.
But also heroes. So all the great kings and queens of countries, the high-level wizards, all of these things. My goal is to have everything.
But what's the point of having so many figurines if you don't have any amazing terrain to place them on? Robert has no shortage in that department either.
I need to be able to adapt to wherever the party's going to go. That means that I need to have my green terrains. I need to have mountain terrain. I need to have all of my winter terrain, my arid desert terrains, my water terrains. If they're going to go into a town, now I need a town, okay, are they in a Roman town? Are they in an Anglo-Saxon town? Are they in an African town? Is it high medieval? Is it low medieval? So now I'm trying to be able to put out a village or a town for every one of these historical settings.
That's insane.
I can't put figurines on the table unless they are painted up to a certain level. That means that someone's got to do a heck of a lot of painting. And so that ends up being me. If you found me on an average day working on the game, you'd probably see me in my painting room, and I'm going to be spending 2, 3, 4 hours painting figs.
And do people take their figs home?
No, nobody is allowed to take their figurines home.
He's
Nobody
in
is actually
control here.
allowed to touch the figs on the table. So that's also something that would be different. A person who played Dungeons & Dragons would probably come to my table and they would immediately reach over to grab their fig. I'm probably going to growl at them and tell them, don't touch the figs because I have to move everything. I'm sure my critics would say that there's a god complex going on about that. This here...
And I don't think they would be wrong in saying that to an extent. But I mean, that's kind of how you have to be. You're creating a world. It's your world that you're sharing to the people that get the pleasure to play. And I mean, it is a give and take. But, the masterpiece, you have to have a dungeon master that is doing all this stuff Maybe not to this extent. I don't think you have to go this far. This is like crazy, but I'm sure it is a good old time.
Is the figurine of the demon lord Orcus. It's well known to Dungeons and Dragons, and in my campaign 100 years ago, which would be in actual time something like maybe 1989, the group banished this demon. So they thought that's fine.
Imagine.
Only recently, last year actually, the demon's back. They don't know where he is. They're desperately trying to find him, and he's definitely up to no good.
While fantasy role-playing and nerd culture are often celebrated today, Robert's campaign started during a time when people felt like they needed to play in secret.
In the 80s and 90s, it was certainly more difficult to try to talk about or explain the game to people. I grew up in a very small town, and it was quite a conservative town. And so the town inevitably found out that we were playing, and they didn't know what the heck we were doing. And Dungeons & Dragons had very bad press at the time.
Tonight we begin with a story about
Of course it
make-believe
did.
adventure and real-life violence, and what some critics fear is a connection between the two in a game called Dungeons
Oh my
and Dragons.
gosh.
A movie came out while we were playing called Mazes and Monsters. And it's a story of how they play this game and then they try to act it out in real life, and basically bad things certainly happen.
Can you tell me of the giant dragon? On my travels here, I heard him.
What's now called the Satanic Panic was going on at the time. Why does my son want to play this game all the time? Why is he obsessed about it? What are you doing to him? Are you a cult leader? I got called a cult leader, a communist, like all these crazy labels. When I watched Stranger Things, it obviously hit home for me.
It is almost here. What is it?
What if it's the Demogorgon? Oh, Jesus, we're so screwed if it's the Demogorgon.
It's not the Demogorgon.
The whole concept matched exactly what we were doing in the early 1980s.
Over the following decades, Robert went on to build a campaign of unrivaled complexity.
One of the things that makes my game unique is the story and the depth of the campaign. My world is an alternative fantasy version of historical Earth with then other historical aspects added to it. So if somebody comes in and they want to go to Athens, I can now bring in that history, philosophy, religion into the game.
Oh, so that's kind of cool. So he based it like semi-firmly on the real world, which means as a history professor, I'm sure he has a vast amount of knowledge to pull from to create stories that are kind of tied to like maybe how the real world is and stuff, but somehow it's in fantasy instead of like there's magic and fantasy involved instead of like, you know, real life where none of that's involved. So that's I think that's actually a pretty cool way to do it, because you can still be insanely creative with that, but you have at least that base structure, and then you have the many things that, you know, you can pull from civilization wise and everything, and then go from there and create more to the civilization than ever actually happened.
I'm able to create when I need to create, come up with totally new races, totally new nations, totally new cultures, totally new mythologies, but also to use what the world already has.
A typical dungeon master curates the quest for a handful of players over the course of a few months. Robert, meanwhile, is tracking the adventures of more than 50 players, with story arcs that often span decades.
Since the beginning, there's probably been about 500 characters that have been made and played within the game. When a new player comes in, I'm inviting them to play a game that they're going to be welcome to keep playing until I die.
Yeah, that's commitment. That is crazy, but so cool. So for all the lucky souls that get to be part of that, man, what an experience. Slightly jealous.
So you could start a character.
I take it back. He probably is the best. You know, just let me in. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, as far as depth and detail and stuff goes, and the fact that one campaign has been going on that long and he has 50 different people, I mean, that is mind-blowing, the amount of things you have to remember and think about. Like, oh God. But what a like experience, a journey that would be, running into all those different people and playing a game with that many different people. Maybe your party's run into each other, etc., like are changing things in the world, and somebody else's party is changing other things in the world, and that's pretty dope. Definitely could see why people would get completely obsessed and addicted with this. I mean, props to the guy for like committing to it.
Character, 9 generations later, that family could take over, let's say, the Roman Empire. On one level, you're playing that individual character. On a macro level, you're also controlling the Roman Empire.
That's
so
crazy.
There are numerous story arcs that are going on. Many of those last for generations. There's love stories, romances, there's quests, there's vengeance. All these things are happening.
It's like an epic Dungeons and Dragons game. You know, like it's like epic fantasy where it spans, you know, like talk about Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, and it's like 14 books long, and you know, awesome, amazingly well written. I love that series. I've read all the books, or listened to them, one or the other. But you know, that's a massive world that he creates, a massive story with so many characters in it, to the point where sometimes you as the reader forget who somebody is because you haven't seen them in years or whatever, and then they randomly show back up and you're like, wait, who is this person again? So dude, that's awesome. I'm a big fantasy, I love fantasy fiction, and I love epic fantasy where it tells a massively long, beautiful story. And while I do like other works of fiction, etc., there's something near and dear to me about, you know, epic fantasy. So that's basically what this is, except on an even grander scheme. I think Robert Jordan spent like literally almost his entire life writing those books. And he died before he even finished writing them. But they figured out a ghostwriter because they knew he was going to not make it. And Brandon Sanderson was the one who finished it, and he's also an amazing writer. And he did such a good job. You could almost never even tell that it was a different writer. That's how good he was at recreating Robert Jordan's work in a way that sounds like it was Robert Jordan. It was pretty freaking dope.
Happening. So even though there is this large campaign quest, this large ultimate goal, you've got literally thousands of subplots and sub-campaigns going on. So you're a good thing?
From the beginning, Robert quickly learned which rules could be bent and which rules could be broken.
When we started playing, there was probably a short period of time when I played according to the actual rules, but after that I had to fill in holes, and so I developed my own rule system.
I think that's another really cool thing about Dungeons and Dragons, right? Is every dungeon master, while you are given a set of rules that generally the community follows, you as a dungeon master, you know, as long as your players don't freak out about it, you can create, you know, more or less to it to make it flow better, to make it not take as long to get through things, you know, whatever. So it's pretty cool. I've always thought it would be really fun to be a dungeon master, but the amount of work and time, you know, to really develop a good world, etc., and to get people to do it, it would be pretty difficult. But something I might even try and do at some point in my life. Definitely would love to play in a game again, but about being a dungeon master, I don't know. It would depend on a lot of things. But this is sick.
And I've never really gone back, so I have what gamers would call a homebrew rule system. Yep. And actually that's how the game was intended. When the game first came out, one of the lines in the Dungeon Master Guide told you that these are a set of rules, but to apply these loosely.
Yep. And it's actually funny because a lot of times when you first start on this journey, right, a lot of newer players and newer like dungeon masters, etc., will like want to strictly follow the rules and like, you know, it has to be done this way, etc., etc. And it's like the more you play it, the more you realize that it's about the entire journey And just because, you know, you're supposed to follow this one specific thing doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it. And if you find a better way, a more quicker, efficient way, you know, because sometimes Dungeons and Dragons can get bogged down by all the details, and like combat can take a significant portion of time, and, you know, people knowing what they want to do and like figuring out what their character is going to do. Like, it's just a lot of time that it takes. So it can be really fun, but also can be kind of tedious sometimes when people are indecisive, etc. That's why it is fun to play with people that are very decisive and have played before too, in general. But I think it's also fun to welcome like newbies into it and like get to experience it with them.
And within my game and my world, there are all kinds of different aspects that you wouldn't see in an ordinary Dungeons and Dragons
Like,
rule
I think
system.
this would be
My rules
dope
are
to be
fast,
part of.
they're quick flowing. People don't have to stop and check things, and that speed of gameplay is something that I find so different in my game from ordinary.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you can make it more streamlined to where you're not wasting as much time on the little things, and it's more about the big picture, about what's happening, etc.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Robert strives to keep the stakes as high as possible for his players, especially when it comes to life and death consequences for their characters.
I want death to mean something. I don't want this to be like a video game that you simply hit the reset button and you're just going to start a new character. So when your character dies, if you don't have any other characters, then you're out of the game. The game's over for you. And so when characters die or bad things happen, I have seen grown men weep at the table.
I don't doubt it, man. Like, you know, it might sound a little bit crazy to people that have never done this, but, you know, imagine spending years playing a game and then you make one bad decision and your character's dead and doesn't get revived, you know, doesn't come back. You know, because a lot of things have to fall in line for you to be able to save somebody fully. Dungeon masters can't make it easy to just bring somebody back from the dead, you know? So if they get killed a lot of times. Or it's a whole long ordeal and process to save this person and like bring them back from beyond. So I can only imagine putting all that time in and then having your character die in some tragically unlucky or really tough situation where there were no good ways out, and that's what ends up happening. That sucks.
And that's something also, people who don't play are a bit disturbed if they hear that somebody who's been playing a character for a long time weeps at the table. But I'm trying to create emotion. I'm trying to create excitement. People are scared. And knowing that if you die, you could be out of the game, or that character that you put so much time in is now dead. Obviously, people's heart rates are up. There's emotion going on. So I can't be shocked and surprised when that character dies that there's a show of emotion.
Yeah, dude, I think that would be even more... It would make it even worse if you knew that by your character dying, you might not get to be in the game anymore. You know, he might not let you create another character, or I'm sure there's a way that he chooses that, and it's not just 100% based off of whim. You know, and it's sometimes probably based off of the player and how like risky they are or not. Because if you're just somebody who just always risks it and you keep getting your character killed because you're just like playing the game like a madman, I would assume that after a certain point he'd be like, okay, you're actually dead. Nobody's coming. You can't make another character, you know? If you don't respect the game, then I'm not going to let you play anymore. Because it's supposed to be where, you know, your decisions matter. And that's what makes the game fun, is that like you never know what's going to happen, you never know where the story's going to lead, and you are not guaranteed to make it out of any situation you choose to put yourself into. So be very careful how you react to situations, because just going in, swinging your sword, shooting magic at everything, like, you're not going to survive, you know, and that's what makes it fun.
I have one daughter, and ever since she was a baby, she's been around this. I think maybe when she was 6 or 7 was the first time when she asked whether she could play. So she created a character as a fairy, and she still plays now. She's 20 years old. I mean, obviously, there's other stuff going on in her life, but she's been playing all the way through. The interesting thing happens when she starts dating and then her boyfriend wants to play. And of course, I have to tell her straight off the go, now, this relationship may not last forever, but the game's gonna last forever. So get ready, because I'm anticipating a situation when you break up with him, I can't break up with him. So once I allow somebody to come into the game, I'm never ever gonna stop them from playing the game.
What?
So sure enough, that situation happened. And so it can be a little bit awkward at times. But it means a lot to be.
Hey, I like that though, because I mean, that's the truth of it. You can't just remove people out, so. Yikes. Imagine being the boyfriend and you're like, yeah, I still want to be part of this because this is too dope. You know? So you're just there and you have to you have to play games with her father. Oh man, and see her maybe potentially, like, what? Tragic.
Be able to have my daughter play the game and to have her interested in the game. And she obviously knows what the game means to me, for sure. I think there's an assumption that at some point we're all going to grow up and we're going to stop playing games. And so people always say, how does your game end? How's it going to end? And it's like, well, my answer is always, how does the world end? How is your world going to end? And well, it's probably going to end when I die. Well, for you it is, right? And so the answer is largely the same. It's much like life. More than anything else, the game represents friendship. And I find that friendship is based on planks. You need something to hold it together. So we may have gone to high school together, but as we go through our lives, unless we have a plank, we're not going to get together. We're not going to fly to see each other. So as long as I can keep doing it, hopefully for all of my life, I won't lose my friends. My basement's my sanctuary. It's a place that I can come and I can almost as soon as I walk down here, I am in a different world. And it opens up all the doors of creativity. I don't ever intend on stopping playing, on stopping painting, on stopping building, and on stopping bringing my friends together to play the game. I don't ever intend on quitting.
You know what's really interesting too is like how well spoken he is. You'll notice he barely says doesn't have a lot of verbal fillers. Like, this man knows what he's gonna say. He knows he knows how he is going to say it, when he's going to say it, and why. I bet you it would be extremely fun to play in his games, because he seems like he really knows what he's doing, has a vision, and is going to make people follow that and experience that and traverse his world in, you know, tons of different ways. So that's pretty dope. I wish I could be part of something like that, you know. I think that would be absolutely so cool to be part of a Dungeons and Dragons game that lasted that long and had that much history and theory behind it. But props to this guy. Awesome. I will see you guys next time. Peace out.